Welcome to the first chapter. In this lesson, we will talk about the Adquio web interface. And for this, we are going to talk initially about the basic concepts. We will also talk about the connection with Adquio, what possibilities we have to do it. We will also talk about the interface management, the general structure of said interface, and of the common elements of tables and forms. Within the basic concepts section, we must mention the architecture of variable, devices, and modules. In this small diagram, we can see an example of several physical devices. On the left, device 1, device 2, device N, and within Adquio device 1, with its module. The module can be considered as a connection driver. We see that each device has a module. On the other hand, we see that for an external device, physical device 2, we can have two logical devices in Adquio. This occurs on many occasions, in examples such as that we have a gateway against climate devices, and this device physical 2 would be a gateway that converts the data from N climate devices. Then, within Adquio, the simplest and most comfortable thing is to also create N devices that attack that gateway, and each one of them takes a range of variables that corresponds to each one of the physical weather machines. In this way, everything is much more natural and much closer to reality. So, once we know that within Adquio, the devices do not have to match with the physical devices outside, we will see that each device has a set of variables. In this case, in the example of device 1, we have the variable from 1 to 5, and, as an example, in device 2, since we have a physical variable, device 2 would be the UE_01 of evaporator unit 01. For some types of variables, for example, the modes in the example below, are seen by the evaporator unit 02, UE02 with the variable set mode. That mode has three values, 0, 1, and 2. How to know what 0, 1, and 2, except that we have been the ones who made the program, we do not have to know it. A little can be assigned to each of these values. In this case, we see that in the example, 0 off, 1 on, and 2 auto, have been assigned. These littles will appear in all the points of Adquio where that variable is used. If we see, for example, a variable in a list of variables in real time, if we want to edit it, in addition to being able to set the value to 0, 1, and 2, we will also see a drop-down menu, in which we can select between off, on, or auto. Both in the web interface and in programming, we can use either of the two values. To see how to connect to an Adquio, we are going to use the Quick Start Guide that is included in all the boxes of each Adquio on paper. First we will see how to connect by Wi-Fi, and later, we will see how to connect by cable. To connect via Wi-Fi, the first thing we must do is make sure that the network cable of the WAN connection is disconnected. The access point starts if when we start our Adquio, this WAN network cable is not connected. After disconnecting the network cable of the WAN port, we will connect the power cable. We will wait a few seconds in the device that we are going to use to connect. We will see a network with this name Adquio, and a number. In each case this number varies. Then we will connect to this Wi-Fi, simply clicking on it, and we will use this password. Very well, from there, we will be connected to the Wi-Fi generated by Adquio. We will open a browser, and go to the IP address 172.20.21.1. Once we press enter, we will see the login window. To enter the first time we will use this username and this password, and, once the login button is pressed, we will see this window. This window will ask us to change the password, since the default password is very basic, and very typical, and is the most used practically, and is super insecure. Under no circumstances should we leave the password by default, since we would be very exposed. Therefore, we will write our password, we will repeat it to make sure it is correct, and we will indicate the old password, which is logically the same. We recommend that the password include uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols, punctuation symbols, such as period, hyphen, parentheses, and so on. Once this is done, we will arrive at the Adquio interface, and we can start working. This in terms of the Wi-Fi connection. As for the cable connection, we must connect a network cable between our laptop and one of the Adquio LAN ports. In the case of a Mini that only has one network port, it would be on that network port. Subsequently, we must make sure on our computer, whether it is a Mac, a Windows, or a Linux, that we have the network configuration set to automatic mode. This helps us both to obtain an IP address and to obtain DNS. What it will allow us, is that our computer takes an IP that will automatically provide Adquio through the network cable. We will observe when our computer obtains the IP, and once we see that it has already obtained an IP, we can start working against our Adquio. In this case we will go with a web browser to the address 172.20.20.1, and enter the window of Adquio login, exactly the same as in the previous case. Alright, this is in theory, let's see it in practice. We are then going to enter as a user, and press login. Very well. We are now inside the web interface of Adquio. We are going to review the areas of the interface that are generic. The first thing we have is the menu, is the SES name. If we click on it, we will see the session options, in this case close session and change password. Closing the session would take us to the login window through which we have just entered, and changing the password would open the window that we saw in the documentation for changing the password. Very well, below, we have the current date and time in which Adquio is. This is important to check once we have an Adquio installed. If it is in the correct time zone, according to the country in which it has been installed. If this is not correct, we must go to Adquio Cloud, and change the country in which it is installed, and therefore the time zone there. Next, we have the update information icon. Adquio has updated itself, without user intervention, and, therefore, here we have the improvements that it has received in recent months. Next, we have the help icon. This icon is very important, since it includes a very complete manual that explains absolutely all the concepts of Adquio, from the web interface we are in right now, to the scripting part, the part programming. In the programming part, we even have a JavaScript tutorial from scratch, in which we can consult any basic concept of JavaScript. All the documentation is with examples, so that it is very easy to follow it, in case we are training, and want to directly copy and paste an example in the Adquio programming area. We go back. Well, next, we have in the upper bar the Adquio logo, and an icon that allows us to open and close the menu captions. This is used since many Adquio windows, we get lists of this type with many columns, and the more we have space horizontally because we can see it better, then, once we are used to the legends, we no longer need them, and we can close that menu, and keep only the icons. Now, as we are in training, we are going to display them. Well, we are going to make a quick view of these menus, because later, in the next chapters, we are going to see each one of them with all the detail. We have a zone of variables, that is what we are seeing at the moment. We have a zone of devices, one data export zone to another device superior to us, the programming zone, time scheduling, the scripts zone, which is where Adquio is literally programmed. The alerts zone, alert management and alert configuration, the data collections, which we will explain what they are, and the area of the system. Very good, because with this, we have already seen the first 4 points, the basic concepts, where we talk about devices and variables. The connection with Adquio both by Wi-Fi and by cable. The handling of the interface. And the general structure of this interface. Now, go with the common elements of the tables. To work on an example of a table, we are going to use the table of variables, which is the one that appears when we enter the web interface of any Adquio. If a table is modifiable, we will see that in its upper right corner, these 3 dots, that if we press them, the menu appears, that allows us to select which columns we want to see, and by dragging to the right, we could eliminate columns from that list. By dragging to the left, columns are incorporated. In addition, we can also order, by simply clicking on the column, and taking it to the position where we want it to be. As you can see, it is very simple. Another very typical element is the one that appears when we go to the head of a column. If we see this little arrow and click it, we see that the order is from highest to lowest, as in this case, and from lowest to highest. In this way, if it is a numerical value and we had temperatures for example, we would order the temperatures according to this criterion. Another important thing is that you will have already seen that many of the values in this table are flashing yellow. This happens every time that value is updated. All the tables, or all the lists of this type, that show values in real time, are being updated. Every 5 seconds, from the machines themselves, that is, the values are being read every 5 seconds, and shown here in real time. We see that we are reading every 5 seconds up to 717 values in this case, which are all those in our real installation. But, we are only showing the first 50, because logically 717 cannot be displayed simultaneously on a computer screen. Well, then, just let us know that if we see that it blinks in yellow, it is that that value has just changed. In addition, each column that has this symbol in its header will allow us to filter by a series of preset values. In this case, as is the device column, and Adquio knows how many devices we have, allows us to select which device we want to see. In this case, for example, we are going to see the internal data of Adquio. For example, we see that we have the use of the processor, that is 16%. We see that we have the temperature of the processor, which is at 51.5 Celsius degrees, etc. And all this would be filtering by the static device. If we filter by any other, then exactly the same, obtaining the variables filtered by the device that we have selected. To remove that filter, we simply click this X and that's it. There are also columns that have a magnifying glass in their header, that allows us to filter by a text that we are going to write. For example, if I want all the tensions here, I just have to put tension, and we see that automatically, in real time, all the values that are below, I am being filtered by those that contain the word tension. But I can also make more complex filters. For example, *L1, it would allow me to see anything that ends in L1. In this case, as you can see, we are seeing all the values of the line L1. To remove the filter, as in the previous case, we click the X on the column. Another important thing that we already mentioned in passing before, is that at the top and bottom of all reports of this type, we are going to have this browser. This allows us to see that we are seeing 50 results per page, although we can change it to 100 or 500, and that we are looking at page 1 of 50, and we have 898 values, with the little arrows to the sides. We see the next 50, the next 50, the next 50. You see that they load quickly. If we click here, we will go to the last page, and if we click here, to the first, previous page, next page, last and first. Now, we are going to see the common elements of forms. For this we are going to use a device registration as an example. Well, here we have an example of several of the typical form controls. The first thing we have, sliding elements, that allows us, for example, in this case, activate and deactivate functions. In this case, we are going to say that the device is deactivated. Then, we have drop-down elements, that are easily identified, because they have a downward arrow, that invites us to click. So in this case, since we are creating a device, we have all the devices types that Adquio supports on the recording date of this video. Then we have fields that have an asterisk. This asterisk is important, because it tells us that the field is mandatory, that is, there, we have to put something yes or yes, and they also have here an admiration that tells us what type of content they expect us to put in that position. In this case, as it is a code, it is indicating that it must be unique, that is, we cannot have two devices with the same code, and it also indicates that its name must have letters, and does not admit accents or symbols, except the underscore, and the middle dash. Then, to type in a field of this, we simply click on it, and as we see the code rises to the top, but it remains in red because it is in red while the value in the field is invalid. So, we are going to put, for example, a fairly simple example. I will put device 1, you see that it has just changed to blue. That means that the code is already valid, because the code then has just verified that it is unique, that there is no other device with that code, and that is also valid, does not have any of the characters that we mentioned before, that were invalid, for example, open parentheses, close parentheses, or for example that begins with a number. All this would be invalid for it. If it is invalid, what we will to prevent us from recording, if we try to say save, it tells us that an error has occurred, and that we review the data. Well, we are going to remove this one, then, the rest of the fields, as they are fields in which we simply write, and that admit any value, because it is for example a description. Here, if we can put what we want, and normally, the fields that must already have a value have a default value written. In most cases, when we create a new device, this value is not necessary to touch it, except that we are connecting with a device from a manufacturer, and that its specifications indicate otherwise. And finally, we have the button Save. Save and Return. Save saves it but they stay in the window we are in, and Save and Return saves it and returns to the list of devices. Return, what it does is leave here without saving. Let's tell it yes, because we don't want to. Very good. And with this, we have already seen the last 2 points of the common elements of tables and forms. We have finished Chapter 1 of the overview of the Adquio web interface. We are waiting for you in Chapter 2.